Welcome to another reading of the book that is changing the world. Edgar J. Ridley's The Golden Apple Changing the Structure of Civilization, the Anthology. We are so glad to hear how much all of you are enjoying this groundbreaking work, as well as how useful you are finding it in your businesses, academia, and medical settings for changing behavior. Today, we want to focus on Book 3, Chapter 1 of The Golden Apple, the Anthology. Edgar Ridley's discussion surrounding James George Frazer's use of symptomatic neurological sampling. You may recall in Edgar Ridley's previous two volumes of The Golden Apple, he made it crystal clear that early humans whose behavior was symptomatic suffered a neurological misadventure. That symptomatic process was innate to the neurological processes, which enabled man to act out symptomatically. As man encountered phenomena that were puzzling and a perceived threat, he began to mythologize. This in turn created a pattern of symbolic, superstitious behavior that has lasted into today's world. That dynamic of symbolic behavior set humanity on a permanent symbolic quest. That symbolic quest has ushered in a permanent state of destructive behavior framed through a pattern of myth and superstition that has resulted in the destruction of billions of lives. There is no doubt that symbolic behavior has caused mental confusion to such an extent that, despite periods of human creativity, has destroyed any gains of civil discourse. Religious wars and racism were created and caused by humanity's quest for a symbolic life that has led civilizations to a constant state of war and massive genocide. Many scholars have attempted to explain the behavior patterns that have led humanity to such a paradoxical and hypocritical existence. However, what has emanated is racist scholarship that has produced a massive falsification of history that continues and gets worse as time passes. In the studies that Edgar J. Ridley has conducted, the two scholars that he felt sincerely solved this problem are Shayana Diop and James George Frazer. Interestingly, both scholars have been maligned by not only their scholarly peers, but the general academic community. What James Frazer has done in his 13 volumes of The Golden Bough is to document the results of humanity's symbolic quest that has led to a permanent state of superstitious behavior. Out of this superstitious behavior, the origins of racism and all religions was created. A supporter, F.D. Montaigne, said these words regarding James George Frazer. Frazer took the vast body of mythical and anthropological material available in his day and constructed an overall picture of how, at the primitive level, humanity in general thinks and acts, and how that primitive mentality persists even into the modern age. Not only did the book provide a frame of reference for interpreting and understanding the phenomena of particular cultures, both ancient and modern, but Frazer's work also helped reveal the full significance of mythology, which otherwise might have remained an airy fancy with no social or psychological relevance to modern humanity. So we think about it, Edgar Ridley tells us that the value of Frazer's work is immense, simply because he dealt with the main reason why humanity saw fit to kill and mutilate their conquests. Many scholars have stated that Frazer's work is basically obsolete in this modern age of technology and new scholarship. We must remember that Frazer presented how symbolism affects humanity from beginning to end. A. B. Cook and Theodore Gaster are two scholars who have presented interpretations of Frazer's classic, The Golden Bough. Although A. B. Cook eventually became Frazer's friend at Cambridge, Cook reviewed Frazer's work from the Classical Association. In his review, called The Golden Bough and Rex Nemorensis, Cook criticized Frazer's work for being largely hypothetical and followed up as describing his work as full of conjecture. Cook's statement was, in estimating the value of Dr. Frazer's view, we must bear in mind that from first to last it is very largely hypothetical. It is a conjecture that the African priest was deemed a living incarnation of the tree spirit. It is a conjecture based on this conjecture that as such he would be credited with those miraculous powers of sending rain and sunshine, etc. It is a conjecture supported by this conjecture on a conjecture that therefore he had to be killed in order that the divine spirit incarnate in him might be transferred in unabated vigor to his successor. Propped on this, in turn, are yet other conjectures that the rule of succession at Nemi was mitigation of an earlier custom of putting him to death at the end of a set period, and that he was perhaps allowed a chance for his life by flight. If we go further, critic Theodore Gaster suggested that the Golden Bough's title was inaccurate. Gaster, a folklorist of international repute and master of 29 languages and Gaster stated, Frazer's elaborate exposition of primitive customs and their modern survivals must now be read as a treatise in its own right, and not as an illustrative commentary on the ancient Latin institutions. Since, however, it is impossible to eliminate all reference to the latter without destroying the whole structure of the book, it has seemed best to retain it with this express warning that it must now be regarded only as an artistic and fanciful leitmotif, not as a factual scaffolding, and that the title, The Golden Bough, is in truth a misnomer. Scholars have generally misinterpreted Frazer's main points. Edgar Ridley finds it profound that academia has essentially ignored Frazer's 13th volume, Aftermath. They act as though Aftermath is not even part of Frazer's classic work, The Golden Bough. They completely ignore Frazer's statement that he intended the 13th volume to be an important part and the completion of his classic work. Scholars have overlooked the main value of Frazer's work because it homes in on the causes of the phenomena of religious conflict and racist behavior that continues to plague civilizations in the current day. To Frazer's credit, he eloquently stated that if his theories were proven to be wrong, he was willing to change them. Although Frazer admitted that he took his theories lightly, he emphasized his desire to eradicate the ignorance and superstition so prominent in human behavior. Frazer stated, I have sought to base my conclusions by strict induction on a broad and solid foundation of well authenticated facts. In the present work, I have extended and strengthened the foundation without remodeling the superstructure of theory, which on the whole I have seen no reason to change. But now, as always, I hold all of my theories very lightly and am ever ready to modify or abandon them in the light of new evidence. If my writings should survive the writer, they will do so, I believe, less for the sake of the theories which they propound than for the sake of the facts which they record. They will live, if they live at all, as a picture or moving panorama of the vanished life of primitive man all over the world, from the tropics to the poles, groping and stumbling through the mists of ignorance and superstition in the eternal search after goodness and truth. When I first put pen to paper to write The Golden Bough, I had no conception of the magnitude of the voyage on which I was embarking. I thought only to explain a single rule of an ancient Italian priesthood. But insensibly I was led on, step by step, into surveying, as from some specular height, some Pisgah of the mind, a great part of the human race. I was beguiled, as by some subtle enchanter, into inditing what I cannot but regard as a dark, a tragic chronicle of human error and folly, of fruitless endeavor, wasted time, and blighted hopes. At the best, the chronicle may serve as a warning, as a sort of Ariadne's thread, to help the forlorn wayfarer to shun some of the snares and pitfalls into which his fellows have fallen before him in the labyrinth of life. Such as it is, with all its shortcomings, I now submit The Golden Bough in its completed form to the judgment of my contemporaries and perhaps of posterity. Frazer's critics were motivated by their disdain for Frazer's last volume called Aftermath. As Frazer stated, among primitive peoples, especially in Africa, natural death has commonly, or even regularly, been ascribed to the effects of maleficent magic, and the death has been usually avenged by the murder of the imaginary but really innocent culprit. Speaking of the Kafir tribes of South Africa, a good authority tells us that so strong is this fear of being accused of getting rich by magic that many people purposely refrain from undue cultivation of their land, lest others should accuse them of using magical practices to increase the fertility of the soil. As a result of Frazer's emphasis on Africa, Frazer's critics chose to disregard Frazer's Volume 13, Aftermath. Indeed, it was suggested that Frazer's age and frailty, including blindness and deafness, were sufficient to discount the entire Volume 13. Therefore, it is very common for Frazerian scholars to only reference Frazer's 12 volumes. Frazer's critics that disregard Volume 13 because of Frazer's emphasis on Africa demonstrate their racism. Even the renowned Egyptologist Sheikh Diop stated that the goddess Diana of Attica was an Ethiopian. She was worshipped at Boron, and it was Apollo who took her away from Ethiopia. Elsewhere, she was known as the Ethiopian. It is often said that James Frazer was an armchair anthropologist. It was also said that the experiences of the ancient people that Frazer received from his collaborators were false or left a lot to be desired. The inference being that because you aren't physically at the events that you're describing, you cannot properly analyze and experience existentially the event that you are describing. In fact, it has been incorrectly stated that he never visited the places that he talked about in The Golden Bough. Frazer did visit Lake Nemi twice in Italy, which was the core of his 13 volumes of The Golden Bough. Scholars do not want to deal with reality and what it means for humanity to rid itself of superstition and ignorance. That means that humans would eradicate symbolic thought and behavior, which is the origin of racism and religion. Whites do not want to rid the world of racism for the simple reason that they have a sick fixation, both racially and religiously, on people whom they deem to be different. Because of that, they cannot tolerate that all people have their roots in Africa, meaning that non-African populations do not exist. This intolerance leads to a permanent habit of mythologizing all scientific facts, or what the great Sheikh Diop called a monstrous falsification in history.